Today, I am here with Chris Elston, and he's better known as Billboard Chris. I just want to thank you for all your efforts and for willing to talk to me today. And why don't you just tell people what it is you do?
Sure. So I'm a dad of two girls, and I got tired of all this craziness going on with gender ideology, specifically the medical transition of children. And so I started off this campaign a couple years ago. Um, a woman in the UK named Posey Parker had put up a sign at the Edinburgh train station that said, "I love J.K. Rowling." And I imagine your viewers are all pretty up to speed on this, but J.K. Rowling has spoken out in favor of women's sex-based rights, of course, crazy things like men shouldn't be going into women's prisons and we shouldn't have men going into rape shelters, really radical things like this. And then she's also spoken out against the medicalization of kids, giving these children experimental puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. In the United States, they're doing double mastectomies on girls as young as 12 years old. This is from the words of a clinician at Kaiser Permanente himself. And so I started learning about all this, and I have two girls, and they were coming into that age where all these kids are getting affected. And up here in Canada, I think we're probably the worst country in the world for this. And where I live in the Vancouver area, I think we're the worst in Canada. So in a way, we're the epicenter for the entire world. And it's nuts up here. So, but still, a lot of people didn't know what's going on because this is still pretty new. And so Posey Parker put up this billboard, said, "I love J.K. Rowling." It got taken down the next day because some people on Twitter complained. And there's a whole lot of things going on in the world that bother me, but freedom of speech is one of them. And I just had it. And I said, no, we can't let this happen. So I followed Posey's lead. And in September of 2020, I put up a big billboard leading into Vancouver that said, "I love J.K. Rowling." And predictably, it got bombed with paint overnight. And then a Vancouver city councillor, woman named Sarah Kirby Young, said it was hate speech. And she pressured the sign company, and they covered it up the very next day.
Wow.
So that made some news, went a bit viral all over the world. And I leveraged all the outrage online into a little fundraising campaign. And I put up billboards in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, all throughout Utah. A businessman there helped me out throughout the Washington, D.C. metro in several different underground stations, and then Times Square. So that was all September 2020. And I was on a mission, but I didn't know what to do because I can't even put up a sign in Canada. We only have two sign companies and they wouldn't do anything. None of the media will cover this. I didn't have any platform. I'm literally just a dad. I'm nobody. And so I said, well, I'm not going to let them cancel my speech like that and censor me. So I had a sign made that said, "I love J.K. Rowling." And I had another sign made that said, "Gender ideology does not belong in schools." Those are my first two. And
Such
first place I
innocuous
went,
signs. I mean, these are
yeah,
incredibly benign.
yep. But they invite an incredible amount of hate, especially the J.K. Rowling one.
Mm.
And so they took down my billboard, and I said, forget this. I'll go stand where the billboard was with this sign, which I did. And I started talking to people. And then I started going downtown Vancouver, and I just kept talking to people because even before I set out on this, I didn't know exactly how my campaign would look like, but I was setting out on a mission to create awareness. And all throughout this almost 2 years now, I've been going out on the street, having one conversation at a time, hours at a time, knowing that if I just didn't stop and I took all the abuse and the physical attacks and the false arrests, the wrongful arrests, that this would eventually grow into something, because there's no other option really. If you're respectful and professional and you just keep telling the truth, even though it takes a while, it'll grow, because word of mouth is powerful, especially when you're speaking the truth about something so harmful as this child abuse.
Well, and
And
you're
finally,
also
I feel I'm
showing,
getting some
oh, go
traction.
ahead. Yeah, you're also
Sorry.
showing the difference between having a respectful conversation on one end and the hate on the other, because I believe at one point somebody broke your arm simply because you were out there trying to talk to people, have conversations about what's happening.
Yeah, they did me a big favor, and I got attacked by Antifa, 5 or 6 people, one woman, rest were all men. And I didn't know they were coming for me until they were about 2 feet away, and I got instantly punched in the face. Another guy punched me in the back of the head. Simultaneously, my front and back signs were ripped off of me. A man was stomping on my body cam in the middle of the street. And this was in Montreal because I had been traveling across Canada. I wasn't allowed into the US because of COVID. And it happened at 7 p.m. on a Friday night, 1 hour before curfew. Yeah, that went a bit viral because I was upset that they stomped on my body cam, and I certainly wasn't going to run away from these people because that's what they want, and that's just not in me. So I pulled out my phone to film them to get their images for police who did nothing. And so I filmed the last minute of that attack, and a man picked up a big traffic cone. And whatever, it's a traffic cone. He swung it at my head 4 times. I blocked it each time with my left forearm, giving my best Karate Kid impression, wax on, wax off. And I think on the second blow, in the video, you can hear a little click. The ulna, it's just a weak bone and it's not really well protected. And the base on those traffic cones is pretty thick. And this is one of those big ones.
Yeah, I was gonna say those are hefty. I mean, I've in my day tried to move them, and they're not light. I mean, they look like they would, no big deal, but they're weighted at the bottom so that they're not blown over and such. So the fact that you were able to block it and it didn't hit you in the face is great. The fact that you broke an arm is horrible. I mean, the fact that they were able to perpetrate this violence against you with really no consequence.
Yeah, there was no consequence. A month and a half later, so 27 days later, the investigators started the investigation. And I said, you'd better hurry because you have my footage, but there's all this street footage you can be getting because there's cameras everywhere. And a month later, he called me, and guess what? They'd lost all the street footage. Wow. Convenient. They did nothing. They did nothing. These people are obviously known to police. These are, the anarchist types that go to all these different Antifa rallies. I had pretty good imagery of them. They for sure know who they are, and they just don't want to do anything because they don't want to deal with it. And that's the scene that's repeated many times across Canada. In Ottawa, I've been assaulted right in front of police. 200 university counter-protesters came to me one day. There was about 12 police there. All the media were there. And I got punched in the head twice. I got my car keyed. I got painted on. I got spat at. I had my signs destroyed. And police just watched.
Wow.
And
what a bizarre country where you're attacked, violently attacked, and nothing happens, but a dad speaks out against his daughter being transitioned by the government, and he's put in jail. I mean, what a strange juxtaposition there. And obviously where their priorities are as a country. Do you have a sense of where this is coming from?
Well, I mean, that's a long conversation. This queer theory, as we call it, should have stayed in some obscure corner of university.
Yeah.
But it's really this far left push of this ideology that is now permeating all of society. It's essentially the state-sponsored religion. It's in our government, in our corporations, and in a lot of our schools.
Do you have a sense of how is that Canada has just gotten so infected compared to other countries?
We don't have conservative media, for one thing. We do have rebel media, but not a lot of people see them. They don't have any real mainstream outlet. The 3 main media sources we have are all pushing Trudeau's agenda. Justin Trudeau is essentially what you would get if you had AOC as president in the United States. And because he doesn't have a majority government, we have 5 different parties with seats in parliament. So he has a minority of the seats. He has the most votes. He has a minority of the seats, though. So if he wants to pass any new bill, another party has to come along with him. So he teams up with an even further left party called the New Democratic Party, and he'll give them something that they want, and then they'll support his bill. And so we just have this radical left government pushing all this ideology through. We have no media pushing back against it. And all of our so-called conservative party members, who are the second biggest party, they're all cowards. They won't speak against any of this. Even the conservative leader of Canada last year, when I was in Ottawa in May of last year, he was coming back from lunch and he saw me standing on the street in front of Parliament. There's only one entrance. He was across the street at the crosswalk. He hit the button. He looked up and he saw me. So who am I? I'm just a dad. who's traditionally voted conservative, by the way, never again, not with these guys. But I'm just a dad with a sign on that says children cannot consent to puberty blockers. If this isn't the biggest slam dunk conservative message in the history of the world, I don't know what is. We shouldn't be harming children with experimental drugs and hormones which sterilize them. But the conservative leader couldn't even confront me. Instead of walking the 200 feet straight forward past me to the entrance, he took a left turn. He walked 400 yards out of his way in a heat wave. It was about 95 degrees to the next street, where he then crossed over and then doubled back up this ramp. So I just walked down the other side of the street and I met him at the next crosswalk, asked him a couple questions. He wouldn't answer me. He actually lied to me. He said that he'd already spoken about this issue, which he hadn't. And
it's so strange, because not only should this be, a slam dunk for conservatives, but as liberals as well. Typically, at least historically, liberals have been concerned about experimentation on vulnerable populations, about sterilizing vulnerable populations, about children's consent. I mean, these are all issues that historically the liberals have been very concerned about. But for some reason in this case, they're embracing it in a way that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, well, what they've been successful with, the people on the left with their propaganda, and this is just a propaganda war. This is an information war. And we're up against nonprofit organizations, pharmaceutical industry, of course, government organizations that are funding this, that are just pushing propaganda. They're pushing lies. And how this has been successful is they've ridden on the coattails of the gay rights movement, which, gay rights were won in the first decade pretty much everywhere. And what happens is, when you win your gay rights movement, which I support, I have lots of gay supporters. A lot of gay and lesbians are among the people on the front lines speaking out against this.
There's the LGB has nothing to do with the T. Somehow
right.
The T hitched its wagon to the LGB, and people don't realize that it actually undermines LGBT rights.
That's right. So all these nonprofit organizations like Human Rights Campaign, for example, when gay rights were won, they turned their attention to trans rights, because they have to keep the money flowing. They got to keep everyone employed. And this is nothing like LGB. It's totally different. We should never call it an LGBT community. There is no such thing. And we have this extremist ideology being pushed with a lot of money into our society, and it's indoctrinating our children, because they know, as any totalitarian government has known throughout history, that the best way to create a movement is to go to the children first. And so I try to get the message out there that regarding women's rights as well, we can't just look at the symptom. We can't just look at these middle-aged autogynephiles, these men with these sexual fetishes where they get aroused by the idea of being a woman. We can't just try to target that and stop it by creating awareness. You'll never solve this women's rights issue unless you first solve the school issue. Because if you're graduating millions of kids every year who believe in this ideology, and we are, you're always going to have these issues with women's rights, with sports, with prisons, with rape shelters, with bathrooms and lockers and all of that. So the priority has to be getting this out of schools.
Yeah, not to mention the kids are the most vulnerable. So I think that's where we need to target anyway. So
Absolutely.
you have been doing this now for 2-3 years.
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. So what have you learned?
Well, there's a lot that I've learned. Let's see. 90% of people, I'd say a little more than 90%, support us. They're just quiet, or they don't know what's going on. As soon as you're able to have any sort of nuanced conversation about this at all, people support you. Because guess what? It's not controversial to say that we shouldn't be maiming and sterilizing children. People just don't believe that it's happening. The other 10% or 8%, probably not even that, they're the ones that are driving this whole agenda. Really, it's probably 1% that are driving the bus, and they have a bunch of people, little foot soldiers going along with them, who just don't know what's happening, and they don't want to know. And you cannot get through to someone who doesn't want to know. If they wish to remain ignorant, they will do so. But the actual foot soldiers of this movement, and sometimes I get in trouble for saying this, but it's just the truth, so I'm going to say it. The main foot soldiers of this movement are young women. It's young women, liberal women, under 25 years of age, young university students, young teachers who are predominantly female, who see this as being compassionate. And they're kind of weaponizing that compassion, and it comes out as maybe this toxic attacks on people like me or anyone speaking out against this, because they believe they are helping these children to be who they really are. And I mean, that sounds great. Sounds compassionate. Yeah, let's help people be who they really are. Well, who they really are isn't a child with body parts missing and infertility and an inability to have any sexual function for the rest of their life, which is happening to these boys. So our message is one of the most body positivity. We're the ones who really want these children to be who they really are, because there's no right way to be a boy or a girl. If a girl's more masculine, if a boy's more feminine, wonderful. Gender nonconformity is great. You don't have to change your body to match stereotypes associated with your sex. Just be who you are without resorting to experimental drugs. This is totally crazy.
So I'm just wondering, sort of how, thinking about how you're doing this, you're just a dad, as you've said. How do we get other dads and moms motivated to speak out, motivated to put it out there, not necessarily go stand on a street corner with a sign, but at least to mention it to their neighbors, or, to anybody who brings it up, to maybe post something on social media to push back on this. Because as you said, 90% of people support us or don't know what's going on. And so it's not going to take that much.
That's right.
To peak this, to make a difference here, if people would be willing to do it.
It's happening, Erin. It just, it's a process. It takes time for that snowball to get rolling and turn into an avalanche. But the avalanche is coming. The difference now from 2 years ago when I started this is night and day. It's a dramatic difference. And I see this better than anyone because I'm out there on the street interacting with people from all walks of life. I hang out kind of near this train station downtown Vancouver most of the time. So there's a shopping district there, there's a business district there, there's tons of kids, there's everyone. And way more people know what puberty blockers are. I get way more support. But in the beginning, hardly anyone had a clue. And it's changed dramatically. And a big part of that is due to conservative media in the United States, because even up here in Canada, we do get that. A lot of people will watch Fox News, or they'll watch other conservative media outlets, or we have a lot of conservative podcasters now talking about this. I think in a way, the pandemic, COVID, actually hurt us a little bit because everyone was so focused on that. But now that that's waned a bit, a lot of the attention is turning to this. And we've reached a point where it's unstoppable. Way too many people know what's going on now. So no matter how many of us they try to cancel, like James Lindsay, who got permanently suspended from Twitter today.
Yeah, do you want to just talk about that a little bit? This will probably
Sure.
broadcast in a couple of days, but James Lindsay is one of those, I would consider him on the left. He tends to, I believe he's an atheist. He's pushed back on the critical theory in lots of different ways. I think he's sort of one of my heroes, because he's done things in order to show how insane critical theory is.
Yeah, I don't know if he's leftist or not. He just seems like a smart guy,
Yeah.
I don't belong to any tribe, because to belong to a tribe, you have to subscribe to all of their ideas.
Yeah, I think he and sort of Peter Boghossian and Helen Puckross, and some of the others who are sort of part of that group would describe themselves as
classical liberals.
Classical liberal. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually met him a few weeks ago at this Moms for Liberty conference, and I'll get into that too, because you asked about getting moms and dads going. So moms are going, but I'll get into that in a second. So yeah, James Lindsay got permanently suspended today for, he called someone a child sexualization specialist, which, yeah,
because
I saw
we're
that
not
tweet
allowed
yesterday.
to say groomer. Twitter has decided calling somebody a groomer is hate speech. So he came up with a creative way of saying groomer, which apparently was enough to get him.
Yeah, the key with Twitter is just don't deal with these people at all. I block them all. I never engage with the haters. In fact, I hide their replies when they come in, because they just want to start fights and they're trying to get people suspended, and it just brings in negativity and it lowers your engagement, actually. So I hide their replies and I block them immediately. I've blocked about 6,300 people to date, I think. But yeah, you're going to get in trouble. It's almost always replies or quote tweets that get people suspended. You also can't pick out prominent people like Ellen Page and say Ellen Page is a woman. That'll get you suspended. But normally it's just the replies, because then they get you for targeted harassment or hate speech. You can say certain things as a standalone tweet. That'll be fine. If you say it as a reply, like men aren't women, for example, then they'll get you, because then it's targeted. So just don't deal with these haters and you'll stay on the platform. And it is important to stay on the platform because it's by far the world's biggest. But anyway, yeah, he's suspended. So that totally sucks. And he's such a nice guy. He's so smart. He joined a Twitter space with us the other day. Myself and Tiffany Justice of an organization called Moms for Liberty have started a weekly Twitter space. It's going to be every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And I'll talk about this group really briefly. This is a group that started in January of 2021 by two moms, two former school board officials, just the two moms. And they got tired of all this nonsense that we talk about and, you know, other things going on in schools. So they started this organization called Moms for Liberty. And today, just a year and a half later, they have 100,000 moms and dads. They're open to talking to anybody. Some of these groups, you know, they kind of limit who they talk to. The left doesn't want to talk to the right, or some of the feminists don't want to talk to men, or whatever. Wrong approach. The right approach is to talk to everybody. Because if you're telling the truth, it doesn't matter who you're saying it to. Their views aren't your views. You're not responsible for them. Our main responsibility is to get this message out there. Conservatives and liberals. Because guess what? We need to protect the conservatives' kids too.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because when I first started speaking out, it was only conservative groups that would provide me a platform. And so even though I had never imagined that I would partner with some of these conservative organizations, they were the only ones who were speaking out about this. And so many of us have found sort of these interesting alliances with people that we normally would not have allied with. But I think it's been really good because it's broken down those walls between groups that typically didn't work together. And I found that it's been really good to learn from radical feminists, to learn from Christian conservatives. I've learned a lot from both sides because I think I've tended to be somewhat, maybe classical liberal is how I would have described myself. And so groups like Moms for Liberty are, it's really important to have those groups that will speak out about this to whomever will listen, because as you said, most people don't know what's going on.
That's right. And they get lied about all the time. You see all this stuff, people calling them AstroTurf, as though there's big money behind them. Tina Deskovich and Tiffany Justice, Tina's son was helping pack the boxes where they were selling t-shirts to fund themselves in the beginning. And they just are beautiful people. They're normal people who have excellent leadership qualities. And there was a need for them. And they've surrounded themselves with excellent people. And because they're positive, they're not out there being negative. They're joyful warriors, they call themselves. Positivity is the way to go with this, and talking to anybody. I say yes to everything. If someone has a podcast with 10 people on it, I say yes. If they have 1 million, I say yes. And I think I'm going to be speaking to a few million people next week, by the way. But that's a secret. But but yeah, you just say yes to everyone. You talk to everyone, and you don't have to have the same views as anyone else. Who cares? We shouldn't have the same views of everyone else. Otherwise, we'd be clones. The left is full of clones, essentially. They all have the same views because they're only allowed to have the same views. And it's this attitude which has enabled this ideology to proliferate so much, because they shut off their critical thinking and they don't allow themselves to question anything. So there's plenty of beautiful people on both sides of the political spectrum. I've learned how to message to both of them to reach them. I've got my tactics because I've had, 7 or probably 8,000 conversations now out on the street and elsewhere, and you get the same objections all the time, so I've kind of learned how to deal with them.
Would you mind if we just sort of went through some of those? So how do you respond when somebody says these kids are going to kill themselves if you don't allow them to transition? Because that's one of the most common things that you hear.
Yeah, so that's false, obviously. We can reference all sorts of studies. You can go to statsforgender.org. enter suicide into the search bar. You'll find lots of stuff. You'll find it on my website, billboardchris.com. But when you're on the street, you're not going to get into that. Yeah. The most important thing to kind of disarm these people that are hostile is, well, first of all, you're really not going to reach hostile people very often. It's kind of a waste of your time. But if you do have someone who's questioning and they bring up this objection, find a source of agreement. So I'll say to them, okay, so it's true that suicidal ideation is higher. Absolutely. So now you've just agreed with them. Mm-hmm. Instead of batting heads with them, you've found a source of agreement, and it calms them down a little. It's true that suicidal ideation is higher, and we need to help these children. It's also higher for kids struggling with anorexia, for kids with autism, for kids with personality disorders, kids who've suffered trauma and abuse. Obviously, we need to help them. But it's not okay to say that they're just going to kill themselves when there's not even evidence to support that. And we never use suicide as a weapon to give a child what they want. If we were dealing with an anorexic girl who is suicidal, we wouldn't affirm her anorexia. We wouldn't say, yes, sweetie, you are dramatically overweight. Let's give you some liposuction because we don't want you to kill yourself. We would treat the underlying issues causing this suicidal ideation because it's never one thing. It's always a combination of things. But just find that source of agreement, agree with them a little bit that, yes, suicidal ideation is higher and we need to help these kids. And what they get from you in that moment is that you have compassion. Mm-hmm. So they understand that. The other argument you hear all the time is that puberty blockers are reversible.
Yes. Even though, which is just recently, I think it was just this week, I think it was the FDA came out and said that they need to put some additional cautions on the labels of puberty blockers because they include brain swelling and some other things.
Permanent vision loss.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So non-reversible things, not to mention you can't go back in time and relive your puberty with your peers, but how do you respond? So I'm saying, well, puberty blockers are reversible. It's just giving kids time to figure out what their identity is.
Yeah, that's a lovely marketing pitch, which is all that is. So again, you can find a source of agreement. You can say, sure, if we put kids on puberty blockers for maybe 3 months, not too much harm done, right? But in practice, what's happening is we know from clinics themselves that 98% of these children stay on them for years and go on to the next step, because this is a 2-step process. It's the puberty blockers, so they don't develop their sex-based characteristics, because it would apparently be traumatic for a girl to grow breasts or to have her hips get wider. It would apparently be traumatic for a boy's penis to grow. And then they give them the opposite sex hormones to make them appear more like the opposite sex. So anyway, it's not a pause button. It's not reversible because they stay on them for years. And when they come off of them, I'll often say, what happens then? Do children at 17 years of age suddenly go through puberty until they're 22? No, that window's gone. There's no time machine that takes them back to when they're 12. These boys end up with a micropenis for life. And then they want to invert it with these sex reassignment surgeries. They slice it open and invert it somehow. But because it never grew, there's not enough tissue to do it. And they end up cutting out a piece of these boys' colon or their stomach lining, like what happened to Jazz Jennings at the age of 17, still a minor. And they form this neovagina, which is really just a wound, which is constantly trying to close up as a wound does. And there's always surgical complications and terrible things going on. I tweeted this story of a detransitioner the other day, a young man who figured out he's gay at about the age of 25, but he'd already transitioned. And he's been leaking urine for 5 years continuously because he developed what's called a fistula. It's a passageway from his urinary tract directly into his neovagina. He gets infections all the time. Doctors can't fix it. They don't know what to do. One of these infections is going to kill him one day. And the doctors just want to close him up completely now. But they haven't done that either. So it's like Frankenstein experiments on children.
Yeah. So as you're talking to people, do you see the light bulbs going on? Do you see them sort of, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it is? Can you tell when you've sort of opened somebody's eyes a little bit?
Oh, all the time. Now, again, I'm really not out there to change people's minds. People think that's what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. You're really not going to do that on the street with hostile people because they don't want their minds changed. With them, I just cause confusion. That's my goal. I create this moment of cognitive dissonance, it's called. Yeah. So I might just say, look, first of all, I don't think we should ever be putting these kids in some stereotypical box. If a girl's more masculine, if a boy's more feminine, beautiful.
Mhm.
And I'll just pause. And their heads are inside exploding a little bit, or maybe imploding, because I'm not supposed to say that. I'm supposed to be this terrible bigot with a shaved head, and I'm a white guy, and I'm 6'2". I'm supposed to be some Nazi who's just full of hate, because this is what they've been taught.
Right.
We are like. They
One of
haven't
the
had
things
civil
that-
conversations.
One of the things that tends to disarm them is when I talk about the fact that transing is the new conversion therapy for gay kids. And
That's right.
a lot of times, I've said this to activists here, and you can tell they can't even understand what you just said. I said this to one of the directors of the gender clinic at the University of Utah, and I could tell she had no ability to even process what I had said, because it didn't make sense in her schema of the world.
Right. So in that moment, your conversation's done. No point trying to get more in there. That's an awesome conversation you just had, because you've caused this confusion. She's going to go home. She's still going to be confused. And she's now got, like with what I say with these gender non-conforming kids, I say, yeah, sure, it's beautiful. Present however you like, be more masculine, be more feminine. They get really confused. So now there's two competing ideas in their head. Only one of those can exist, because they can't make sense of it. Now, a lot of them, like in a cult, they're just going to block out this new idea because they don't want to know. But it's in there. And for the truly curious people, they're going to go home and they're going to try to figure out what my position actually is. And so what you just did there is you confused this person, which is fantastic. Honestly, they have to go through confusion, and sometimes they have to go through anger before they can figure out what the truth is. It's like deprogramming someone from a cult. And for all practical purposes, this really is just like a cult, and it's just like cult deprogramming when these people have fallen into it. But that takes time. And it takes the child or the person who has been indoctrinated, it takes them figuring this out on their own. You can't force feed them. You have to ask them questions to get them thinking, to get them challenging their pre-existing ideas. And that's the only way to get that done. But mostly what I'm trying to do is just talk to people who have no idea what's going on. And it takes 1 minute. It takes 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. What are puberty blockers? They say it's a drug we're giving to kids when they want to switch their sex that stops their bodies from going into puberty. And they go, what? That's disgusting. And now they know this is happening. And I say, that's right. And they're maybe walking down the street, they're going somewhere. I'll just say, hey, check out my website or follow me on Twitter. But if you've got kids, you've got to start looking into this gender business, because they are indoctrinating children in schools to believe that they might be born in the wrong body. And they're even hiding this from parents. So I put these seeds in these people's minds, and maybe they don't even have kids. Sometimes I have 30-minute conversations with people. Maybe they're 5 minutes, maybe they're 10. But that seed is in there now, and maybe they just have a baby, but now they're aware of this issue. So I know personally, where I get my satisfaction from is, I know that in 5 or 6 years' time, when these kids start going to school, these parents have been made aware, and they're going to be able to protect their own kids. Because if your kids know the truth first, it's a lot harder for these lies to penetrate. They're not going to work because you've inoculated your kids. But if your kids are just an open slate, and some ideologue with pink hair who's a gender studies grad is teaching their class, your kids are in big trouble, especially if they're on the autism spectrum, because half of these kids are.
Yeah. So what do you have for the future? Are you just going to keep doing this? Do you have plans to expand your efforts? Or are you just going to keep, one person at a time making a difference?
I can't expand because I have no money.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me how many people think that we're raking in the big bucks, and as far as I know, that's not happening.
Yeah, I really do need an assistant, and it would have to be a right fit, because honestly, it's work for me to work with someone, because you're having to guide them through everything. I need someone to constantly update my website. I need someone doing other social mediums for me, like getting Instagram going and Getter and Minds. Like I should be on everything really, because you want to reach as many people as possible. I just don't have time, or the mental energy, because my days, they consume a lot of mental energy, and then I'm doing all sorts of other things too. I can't even respond to all the messages I get anymore, because I get these long messages from parents kind of laying out the life story of what's going on with their kid, and they're looking for help. And so on the side, when no one sees this, you know how it is too. We're in a group together on the Signal chat app, and we're dealing with parents, trying to help them to protect their kids, and trying to find medical professionals for them, and counselors, and even people who can testify in court on their behalf. So there's always work to do. It never, ever ends. So I do need help, but I just don't have the money for it. But I figured out a way to leverage myself a little bit. And I'm going to be working with Moms for Liberty. They got 100,000 moms, 40 states. They're growing all the time. So I'm going to their chapter meetings. I was just in Washington State last week. I spoke at the chapter meeting. There were 7 dads there as well, 1 grandpa. And I'm educating them. So that multiplies my efforts, because now they can go into these school board meetings, and I'm writing speeches as well. I'm going to write 1 minute, 2 minute, and 3 minute speeches. They're going to be done well before the school season starts. I'll have these up on my website. I'll put them out on Twitter. And it's basically going to be a template that parents can use to go to these school board meetings, give these speeches, get these viral moments, put these school board officials on defense. And we're going to create a massive amount of awareness that way. So I'm going to keep working with all these moms and dads, because they're beautiful. They're just like us. They're just regular people who are trying to protect their kids. And I've always had the belief from the very beginning that really the people who are going to end this is going to be parents. We need everyone involved, feminists, conservatives, everything. But it's parents who are going to end this, because the biggest abuse, the biggest medical scandal in modern history is affecting children. And there's no love in this world like that of a parent for their child. So we're going to be the ones that put a stop to this.
Yeah. I'm just really impressed and grateful for all that you're doing, and thankful for your efforts. If people want to get in touch with you, or I guess probably aren't going to be able to have time to, reach out to individuals, but I'm going to put a link to your Twitter in the description below. Do you have a personal website as well?
Yeah, billboardchris.com. People can donate through there. There's a donate button if they want to help support me. And I do need it. I'm always in debt. Whatever. One day I'll write a book or something, maybe, and make some money back. But
yeah, maybe. I don't know. We've Advocates Protecting Children have published a number of books, but we don't feel good about any of the profits from those books coming into our pockets. So they all go right back into the organization to support our efforts. Because nobody should making money off of what's happening to children, the experimentation and mutilation of children. I
don't even mean that. I just mean to support
your efforts. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like I'd rather not ask for donate. I hate the worst part of this is asking for donations. I hate it.
Yeah.
But I can't do what I do without it. I'm traveling around.
Well, and what I'm doing you've really just in brief, as we finish up, do you want to just talk about all the different places that you've been? Because you've really traveled quite a bit.
Sure. All across Canada. Numerous times. Been to Ottawa 8 times, Toronto 5 times, California a few times, Washington State, Portland briefly, Texas, Washington, D.C. a couple times, New York a couple times, Rhode Island, Florida. I'm going to be in Illinois in a couple weeks. I'll be there for about a week. I've been to Pennsylvania as well. I went to the University of Pennsylvania where Leah Thomas, the swimmer, was. New Jersey. I'm going to be in Illinois in a couple weeks. I'm speaking at an event. So I'm super excited, because now I'm getting invited to speak at events, because 1 person at a time is my bread and butter, and I'll keep doing it. But 1 or 2 or 5,000 people at a time is better. And so a lot of parents are supporting me now, and we're getting more people to come out on the street, which is great. I'm getting more media. And then in September, I'm going to be in Pennsylvania. I'm speaking at an event of 5,000 people there. Nice. So that's fantastic.
Yes.
And
those templates you talked about, that's going to be really powerful, because one of the things that I hear over and over again is, I want to speak out about this, but I don't know what to say. And so having templates like you mentioned will be really empowering for parents who know that this is wrong, but don't have the words.
Yeah, I know exactly how to message this now, just because I've had so many of these conversations for the left and the right. And this is one thing I want politicians to understand, in case any of them are watching this, this is a winning issue. You just got to learn how to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's a really winning issue, as we've seen with Glenn Youngkin, where the governorship race turned 20 points in a matter of weeks because of what was going on in school boards and going on in schools.
Yeah.
Ron DeSantis, his popularity is growing and growing all the time because he's the parents' governor. And he just says common sense things like we shouldn't be sexualizing kindergartners. You know, we
What a
shouldn't have
concept.
porn in books in elementary
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah.
We
What a
shouldn't be teaching little kids they're transgender. So
Right. Yeah, we shouldn't be talking about boys having vaginas and girls having penises to kindergartners. We shouldn't be talking about it to any children, but especially not, you know, and they are. And that's, again, I think, you know, having people in the school board meetings talking about what's happening in the schools, because most people don't, it's the same, you know, as the surgeries and the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Most people don't realize this is being actively pushed in the schools. When you look at the sexuality education programs that are being pushed, they're 100% pushing the idea that children can be born in the wrong body, that the way you determine whether or not you were born in the wrong body is if you adhere to regressive sex-based stereotypes. This is what each and every child in the schools is being exposed to now, not just in the US, not just in Canada, but in Kenya and in New Zealand and in England and in, you know, all around the world. This is the messaging that they're getting. So, you know, just saying, you know, why are we even talking to children about something like this? Why are we encouraging them to basically dissociate from themselves and take on a false persona that results in permanent lifelong injury?
yeah, this is going to be a long fight. This is going to go on for a few decades, and I'm not going anywhere. So this will keep growing and it'll keep evolving. But I'm super hopeful, and I want to leave this with hope because we are going to win this battle. It's too crazy to last. People are going to learn the truth. We just got a big fight on our hands. This is the evil of our generation that we need to fight against. So I'm here for it.
Well, and I just think you're a phenomenal role model for your daughters, just showing them how important it is to stand up for truth and to fight back, even when it's dangerous, even when you have people who come after you and want to hurt and potentially kill you. It is important to stand up and fight back for these vulnerable children. So thank you so much for your efforts.
My pleasure, Erin, and thank you for yours. I'll have you on my YouTube channel and we can talk about your story and all the things you're doing one day soon. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you.